keyboard typing. Okay, I guess we should start. So good morning, everyone. On behalf of the COREnect project, I would like to welcome you all to this COREnect Policy Workshop. My name is Jacques Magin from Australo, and today I will be the overall workshop moderator. So the title of this workshop is An Action Plan for European Leadership in Digital Infrastructures. And today we are bringing together stakeholders from both the microelectronics and connectivity domains, and also from public authorities and private organizations, to discuss the priorities and recommendations from the COREnect roadmap and how to implement the concrete steps that would be required to achieve European leadership in microelectronics and connectivity within the next 10 years through a concrete action plan. So I hope that you all have already read or at least glanced at the COREnect roadmap. If you have not, have a look at corenect.eu. On the home page, you can click on roadmap on the top menu, and then you will access the documents that are related to the roadmap. So before we start, I would like to highlight three important things. First, this workshop is being recorded. So if any of you have any issue with that, you should raise your concern by email to me at jack@australo.org. The second thing, please do not forget to mute your microphone if you are not a speaker or a panelist, and if you are not speaking. This shall prevent noise and echo from happening during the meeting. And then finally, if you have a question, you are more than welcome to use the WebEx chat box. So you can write your question there, and I will make sure to relay your question to the speakers or to the panel moderators. Thank you for your understanding. Today we have a very exciting agenda and many high-level speakers from industry and from public authorities. And I would like to thank them already for agreeing to participate in the workshop. So here is the agenda. We have a first part of the workshop that includes a presentation of the CHIPS Act initiative and an overview of the COREnect roadmap and its main recommendations. Then we will have a panel discussing views on the required strategic actions to address EU concerns on its autonomy in trusted critical connectivity infrastructure. After the coffee break, the second session of the workshop will see high-level panelists exchange their opinions on the most efficient use of the existing and planned European landscape to invest and provide policy support for implementing a leading European microelectronics and connectivity ecosystem and an abundant pool of skills and competence. So before we start with our first speaker, I would like to inform you that unfortunately, Professor Gerhard Vedweis cannot make it today. You know, he is ill, and unfortunately he cannot speak and moderate the panel as planned. And Yanning Zhu, who is the technical manager of the COREnect project, agreed to step into Gerhard's steps at the last minute. So I would like to thank Yanning for that. So now I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, but here again, unfortunately, Mrs. Lucila Scioli, you know, is also ill with the same illness, unfortunately, and cannot attend today. So our first speaker will be Mr. Marco Seccarelli, who is Program Officer in Unit A3 of DG Connect. So, Mr. Ceccarelli, the floor is yours for your presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen and you can share your screen for the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. And again,
I'm sorry, but we can
you
barely hear you.
Let's see. Can you hear me any better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay. So again, apologies for this last minute change, but really, as Jacques again was saying, unfortunately, COVID is still spreading around despite summertime. So we all need to be careful. So Lucilla apologizes, and I will have to take care of the presentation on her behalf. I'm just trying now to load my slide. Just a second of patience, please. Okay, should be coming any second now. Hope you can see that.
It's still coming on my screen. Yeah, we have it now.
Okay, very well. As I said, again, it's not Lucilla Scioli make the presentation. So my name is Marco Ceccarelli. So this is about the European strategy for semiconductors mainly. Then we are going to focus a bit more on the connectivity aspect. As you all know, we have been working in the last few months on a proposal for a new regulation, a package essentially, which is called the CHIPS Act. So that will be the main focus of this presentation. Now, the background, I think you are all very well aware about the background that led to the need for this CHIPS Act. Nevertheless, we are talking about, of course, a clear crisis in terms of semiconductors shortage, with different factors contributing. On one side, increasing demand, on the other side, also the fragility of the supply chain. And COVID pandemic only exacerbated this vulnerability. And this had certainly important effect on the economy, and particularly on specific industries in Europe. We see on the right side the example of automotive, with an impact on production of cars that were missing components, but also the telecom industry was affected. So if we look at the European position in the value chain, we see that we have some strong elements where Europe has even leadership in some cases, such as in equipment, generally in R&D. But on the other side, we have unfortunately dependence on third countries on design, particularly on manufacturing and packaging. So we are strong, essentially, as you all well know, in the in technologies that are required for the industries that are strong in Europe, such as automotive. We have security, industry automation, but because also of the lack of local industry, we have fallen behind on chips, on digital chips for computing, for instance, and telecommunication. The market evolution on the other side, we see that there is a fast growth. Historically is around 7%. This may even increase in the future. And anyhow, the market size is expected to double to surpass $1 trillion before 2030. And the main drivers, obviously, are the digital transformation, but also for all the systems, there will be an increased content of semiconductors in general. The main opportunities are in artificial intelligence type of chips, in edge computing. Obviously, the digital transformation itself in all the type of aspects of industry and society, which is also supported by the proliferation of 5G and 6G technologies from industrial environment down to the edge, also in consumer applications. So why do we need a CHIPS Act? The Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced the need for a CHIPS Act the first time in September 21. So essentially, we have been working very hard to prepare this package, which was published on the 8th of February this year. This is, as President von der Leyen was saying, not only a matter of competitiveness, but it's also a matter of tech sovereignty. So why we need a CHIPS Act essentially is to strengthen our leadership in R&D, because of course the other regions are not standing still, and to build and reinforce our capacity in innovation in terms of design, manufacturing, and packaging. As we have seen, we have certain gaps currently, and also to put in place a framework to increase production capacity by 2030. And this is also because we will see this brings about a number of benefits for the full ecosystem, and address the skill shortage that can become a real bottleneck to the growth of this sector, and eventually also to develop a mechanism to monitor the supply chain and possibly to intervene in case of crisis. The CHIPS Act is made of essentially three pillars. The first pillar is what we call the Chips for Europe initiative, is about building infrastructures in synergy with the research program to, let's say, fill the gap between the lab and the fab, and also to support startups and SMEs to lower the barrier of entry to this business. In pillar two is essentially about security of supply. So there we are making use of let's say the provisions that are present in the treaty to allow for support for specific economic sectors. In this case, when there is innovation within Europe, then it will be possible to support the production facilities. And the last one is about monitoring a crisis response, as I said, to let's say address the potential shortages in the future. So the Chips for Europe initiative is essentially made of 5 elements. The first one is to build a virtual platform, virtual design platform, to reinforce our capacity in this field. The second one is to make use of pilot lines. As I said again, the effort, as you see in the bottom, is to reinforce the activities that are between research and production. So there, of course, for the efforts for prototyping and that will lead to production will be made in joint collaboration with leading research centers and the industry in Europe. Then also quantum chips is important for the future. So we want to also support the development in this field. and create a network of competence centers. This is because we need to ensure that the whole ecosystem in Europe is involved in all the member states, and the competence centers can play a crucial role in supporting all the companies around Europe. And eventually, the CHIPS fund has been created in order to facilitate the access to loans and equity by startups, and particularly scale-ups, SMEs in general in the value chain, by making use of two instruments. One is the EIC accelerator, so the Innovation Council, where you have basically inside the accelerator, you have specific thematic challenges. So we create a thematic challenge on semiconductors and quantum chips. And the other one is to make use of InvestEU, that is indeed to use some leverage in the market to support, particularly in this case, a scale up with larger tickets, particularly, for instance, in terms of equity, to support the needs of companies that need to go to their first silicon and beyond. The second pillar is about security of supply in general. Well, in general, is about manufacturing, essentially. So we have this concept of a first-of-a-kind facility. That means that a facility that can offer innovation that is not yet present in the Union can get state aid, can get support for what is related to the funding gap of their project. We have two classes of facilities. One is integrated production facilities, and the other one is open facilities, and that serve, of course, third parties. We will need to look at the positive impact on the value chain. We will need to ensure that this addresses the issue of security supply in Europe, and we need to have a clear commitment to invest in further innovation. These are the prerequisites for the assessment of a first of a kind. And the last one is the pillar 3 on monitoring and crisis mechanism. So you have a monitoring stage with participation from member states. Currently, we call it an expert group, and once the CHIPS Act will be approved, it will become a semiconductors board. So the European Semiconductors Board will be involved in deciding whether there is a situation of crisis, and to trigger the mechanism in case of crisis, there will be the possibility to also make use of an emergency toolbox, which is about gathering information from the players in the market, the possibility to also have priority rated orders in very specific situations, and also measures for export control. And this will be done in a coordination, of course, with the European Semiconductors Board. Now, if we look at connectivity specifically, the state of play is as follows. Well, we have a limited share, let's say, of the telecom equipment market, and therefore we have an overdependence in terms of supply chain, which is detrimental to our sovereignty, European sovereignty, and this is further threatened by the trends in the market in terms of softwareization, as it's sometimes called, virtualization of the network, and for instance, so Open RAN is something that is coming up strongly, where we need to be adequately prepared for this kind of changes in the market. And in general, we know that the chipset industry can have an important role also in standardization, and this we have witnessed that in the 5G rollout, where the chip makers have reaped the benefits thanks to their IP in the standard. And therefore, we think that also moving to beyond the 5G, we should be involved in terms of microelectronics industry in the early R&D phases, like it happened in other regions. So in terms of strategy, we think we need to leverage on our strengths in certain specific technology areas, such as RF, GaN sensing, low power photonics, etc. You know them. Address critical dependencies in digital, particularly in digital components and systems. So we need to get back in terms of processing. And because of the importance that will play both on the infrastructure side as well as on the edge of the network. Develop particularly an ecosystem approach, because we need absolutely an intense collaboration between the key actors of the value chain. Of course, in the semiconductor value chain, but also downstream, including the equipment vendors and the network operators. So we need to strengthen our position in 5G and beyond. For instance, there is still some room to be active for what concerns industrial applications, where we are very strong in the field, but definitely become a driving force in the upcoming 6G standard, in order to make sure that we can favor our own IP and capture the future business opportunity. Now, the CHIPS Act offers an opportunity to accelerate because of the additional budget that is being made available. And we are very thankful to the initiative, to this strategic roadmap of COREnect that is being announced, which can be very instrumental for the achievement of the strategy. Now, if you look at the frameworks, what kind of instruments we can make use of, we have obviously the key digital technologies joint undertaking, which is, I think you know, it is a successor of the Excel joint undertaking. It focuses on electronic components and systems, includes photonics, for instance, and software. But it will become the CHIPS joint undertaking. At least this is the plan in the proposal. So the budget will be extended, particularly for the type of activities that I mentioned before in terms of the Chips for Europe initiative. And I think that will be, so as I said, so the CHIPS joint undertaking will be responsible for the implementation of this relevant part of the CHIPS Act for what concerns R&D. Then, of course, you know very well, the Smart Networks and Services joint undertaking. And then, of course, we were looking favorably already at the interaction between KDT and JU that are taking place. And a already good example of collaboration between the two communities is the new IPCI on microelectronics and connectivity, which has been pre-notified in December 21 with a wide participation of member states and companies. So this is unprecedented, really. It's making difficult on our side for the Commission to do the assessment of all of those projects, but we'll try to move on as quickly as possible so that we can proceed to notification. As you know, this will address, with respect to what KDT, what the JUs can do, will address not only RNI project, but also first industrial deployment, which is an advantage specific for the APCIs. And eventually, what we see as a desired scenario for the future is that we would like to make use really of this think tank, of this group of the two communities that are coming together to develop this roadmap for critical technologies with an industry perspective. And we are very favorable to look very favorably to the early involvement of the semiconductor industry in this debate on 6G. And of course, we see that the strong links between the two joint undertakings are essential. Now, in this slide, I will not go into the details, but you see some example of how the two joint undertakings could collaborate in terms of requirements, in terms of prototyping, from components to systems, and to deployment in our scales pilots. So we, as I said, in terms of collaboration between the two communities required, and we all welcome all the initiatives in these directions, such as the COREnect roadmap being presented and announced today, and also, for instance, the MOU between the two industry associations, the most relevant one in this field, the 6G and the NAS. So that concludes my presentation. And if you have any question, I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ceccarelli, for your presentation and for your even last-minute participation in this COREnect Policy Workshop today. And please convey our wishes of best recovery to Mrs. Scioli. I mean, I do not see any questions for you in the chat box. If anyone would like to ask a question to Mr. Ceccarelli at this stage, please write the message in the chat box. Let's wait another 30 seconds to see if there are questions. In the meantime, I will introduce the next presentation. And I think your presentation is already an introduction to the next one, which will be about the COREnect roadmap. And for that presentation, we have two speakers who were actually quite heavily involved in building up this roadmap. So we have Frederick Tillman, Research Manager at Ericsson, and Frederic Gianisello, RF Technical Leader at ST Microelectronics. Okay, just before we start, there is one question but that's about the relationship between SNS and KDTJU. So I'm not sure it's for Mr. Ceccarelli or the representative of, I don't know. So the question reads as follows. Can you describe more about the relationship between SNS and KDTJU? Will it be a formal merging or more of a collaboration?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Jacques, there will be actually people that are more entitled to answer to this type of questions. However, for what concerns this specific aspect, I can say that it will not be a merging because they have their own mission, which is quite clear cut, and I think we need them to keep them this way. But certainly, collaboration is necessary, and there have been discussions, for instance, about having joint calls. Now, from a technical perspective, that is very challenging. Of course, there can be a lot of collaboration in setting up the strategic agenda and the programs, the work programs. So that is definitely a fact. And therefore, even when preparing the calls, there can be exchange of information. So there can be projects that can, have participants from both sides. But no, it will not be merging the two joint undertakings.
Okay, thank you again. There is another question. Could you elaborate a little more on IPCEI?
Yes, so the IPCEI is a specific instrument that is important project of common European interest. So because of the common European interest, there is basically the possibility that is foreseen in the Treaty of the European Union to have the support for certain economic activity. And in this case, we are talking about not only supporting R&I, but also moving in terms of innovation also towards production for what we call first industrial deployment. That is just the first step to prepare for production, but just stopping just before production. So that is the advantage of this instrument. We had the first IPCEI on the first ever EPCI was the one on microelectronics, which is still ongoing and coming to its end. It took quite some time because nobody had made use of this specific instrument yet. And so it took a while to get it started, but eventually it has proven to be very successful, to the point that now we see many other of these type of projects that are coming up in other areas, such as in batteries, in cloud, etc. So this one on microelectronics and connectivity, of course, is very relevant and brings together the two communities that we are discussing about today. And we're very happy to see, such enthusiastic participation from the member states, because the first EPCI was with only 4 and then eventually 5 member states, although one actually was the UK. So, but essentially we have 4 member states participating with 27 companies. Now we are talking about a much larger size, also in terms of member states. So that means there is a lot of interest. We can consider a wider involvement of the ecosystem. And now the pre-notification has been already made. So I guess that some of the stakeholders today will have been informed about that. But in any case, please follow that. And just as the last word, there are some questions about the overlap between the EPCI, the CHIPS Act, etc. Actually, they have different scope. They are being supported in different manners in terms of budget, and there will be anyway a coordination that will have to be ensured in terms of a strategic roadmap and activities in the context of the Industrial Alliance and in the context of the Semiconductors Board. So that will be ensured in this manner.
Okay, thank you very much again.
You're very welcome.
I think we will proceed with the next presentation. So Fred, you have the floor. We cannot hear you.
Thank you very much, Jacques. I hope you can hear me now, loud and clear.
Yes.
Thank you. Great. So I have the honor, together with Frederic, to present a few slides here about what we have done in COREnect, about the roadmap work and recommendations for the future. So as you may know, COREnect in a nutshell here is a project that's been running for 2 years, coordinated by the Technical University of Dresden, with the main objectives to put together a strategic roadmap and establish a collaboration between the SNS community and the KDT. So we have delivered numerous results along the way, where if we go to the next slide, Janning, very much. Right, so if we go to the next slide, yes, here we can see the 3 latest deliverables we've had in the project. So they're all touching upon the, let's say, the roadmap and the vision we have in the project and the outcome from the 3 expert groups we have that we will hear more about later on. So in this presentation, Frederic and I will try to share pieces of this and what we have done for the last 2 years leading up to the standpoint where we're at right now. So I will start by giving a short introduction to a white paper we presented at the end of last year. So if we go to the next slide, please. This is very much setting the scene why Europe needs to act at this stage. We've been on a fantastic journey so far, but now we see some clouds on the sky. We're in the sky, and we need to pull our act together here and really make good strategic moves going forward. So we'll go to the next slide, please. I will share a little bit what we're facing. You see here at the picture at the bottom, the different phases we've seen for the last 20 years, going from 3G, where we started to offer, let's say, some kind of broadband to the public. We're right now having internet in our pockets, everyone using smartphones, and we're at the doorstep of connecting everything. This is the mission of 5G, starting with an industrial scene more or less, but bridging more and more into all kind of equipment you can imagine. And then the final step, or the next step, I should say, is into something where we must be prepared to handle from a European community. And that is basically where we're moving from the industrial ecosystem where we can allow huge investments to the large public high volume scene where 6G will be a paramount technology connecting everything we can imagine. So you will have digital twins of many things around you. You will have your own personal robotics, everything basically. And we have heard that in various presentations in the COREnect or produced by COREnect over the last 2 years. The vision we have for this and how it will change the European playground and the overall ecosystem. So if we go to the next slide. So I have a short example here, a couple of slides that I would like to give you in order to understand what will happen to all verticals and the implications it will have. So what we have done in COREnect, we have conducted interviews with the auto industry because we believe this vertical is a very nice precursor to illustrate the changes we imagine will happen to pretty much all verticals. And the implications that particular vertical or the implications of connectivity that has put this vertical in many different challenges over the years and very much reside in revolution phase right now. So if you look at this picture, you see two cars. There's pretty much 10 years between them. And from the outside, you cannot tell the difference. They look the same. Whereas we all know that there has been a tremendous journey going from left to right, where the car, if you go to the next slide, has faced a lot of changes. And what we have seen in the interviews is that we can summarize these changes in 5 categories, going from mechanics, electronics, drivetrains, cloud, lifestyle, and new business models. And this is one the feedback we have collected from individuals working in that industry. So I will try to give a glimpse of each one here, just to showcase what we mean. So if we take the next slide, going from mechanics to electronics, this is very much about that strongholds that we have had in the past will not last any longer. Companies, they have been segmenting the market based on mechanics and performance for decades. You have been able to charge more if you offer more performance, horsepower, etc. And that has lasted for a very, very long time period. Now that has come to an end, more or less, where the a larger and larger portion of the consumer base is paying not any longer for more horsepower, but for other items, having the computer or the car turning more into computer and all that has to offer. So we're seeing a clear shift in the auto industry R&D expenditure, that going away from the traditional strongholds into new domains, and by that being able to segment the market in a new fashion. If we take the next slide, so we make a counterclockwise turn here, we're going to new drivetrains. And this is that now when we electrify the auto industry, going from let's say fuel-based vehicles into hybrids and then fully electrical vehicles, we see that there are fundamental changes. We will have major changes when it comes to what will be difficult when manufacturing a car and maintaining a car. All of a sudden, the mechanic maintenance will be much easier. However, the control of the vehicle will increase in complexity. So going from mechanics to software, a different kind of competence needed in order to achieve really good performance and customer value. And we also see that these things, they tend to change over time, right? Just like for the mobile phone here, 20 years ago, standby time was really important. Nowadays, it's good enough. Today, mileage is very important for the car industry. They tell us that maybe 5 years from now, that will also be good enough. So it's all these different aspects, they tend to change over time. So that's important. That push pressure on the industry to continuously sort of develop and look for new playgrounds. If we take the next slide. The next step here, entering the cloud. This is very much how the OEMs, the car manufacturers, will be able to sort of reach out to the market, or their relationship to the market. That will change. In the past, it's been when we were in the more mechanics-oriented world, it was very much you put together the car, you sell it, and then you forget about it. Then you have the dealership that will take care of the maintenance and all steps after the selling point throughout the lifetime of the car. Now, what we see in the industry is that the manufacturers, they will have to deal with the cars they produce all the way to the bitter end. Being able to provide software updates, being able to keep track of the fleet, and make sure that they can offer a maintenance program, not from a mechanical point of view, but more from a system point of view, that will actually last throughout the lifetime, and be able to keep the software in the car, let's say, relevant to the user in terms of new applications that will be developed throughout the lifetime. So this will be a new situation for the manufacturers that they have not been used to in the past. We also see that customers, they will really require to bring their own digital world into the car, meaning that you must have open APIs. You must be able to provide the customer to put its own, let's say, digital reality on top of the car. And that is also a new situation the OEMs are facing. So next slide, please. So the car is definitely not any longer a mechanical beast going from A to B. It's very much going down the same journey as the cell phone, where it's not only a piece of equipment, but it's actually showing, together with the software put on top, how, I mean, who you are as a person, what kind of perception you like to bring when you use the car, how it resonates with the lifestyle, etc. And this will not only be important for the private consumer base, but also for the ecosystem handling carpooling or rental cars. So those fleet providers, they will also really look into how can we add a value on top of what the OEMs are producing. Can they differentiate themselves by putting their own software, using the available APIs, and by that, for instance, maintain a retention policy that works. So it's all about value creation in several steps here. And the OEMs, they must make sure that they provide a platform that can provide this in the end. And that is a key challenge for them. So we take the next slide. And this is entering new business models. So like I said earlier, being able to support the fleet throughout the entire lifetime is going to be important. And by that, we also realize that let's say the consumer base will not necessarily buy cars in the future. It's more about that you pay for usage. We see that in many other verticals as well, but in the auto industry, this is a clear shift. And that has some implications on how the OEMs will need to relate to their products, meaning that there will be a very strong incentive for them to being able to maintain products efficiently, having cars that don't break down, that you have components that will not wear out too easily, so they can sort of stay at the relevant maintenance level and cost level throughout the entire lifetime of the car. As it is today, the OEMs do not have to care. That's if a car breaks down, it's more or less a relation between the customer and the dealership. That will also change, meaning that just like we've seen in the airplane industry, this observability, having sensors, being able to really follow how the car is let's say the status of the car is changing over a lifetime, and so you can do, let's say, mitigation actions or change components before incidents happen, etc., will become very important. This is even further accelerated by autonomous driving, which will recall even more pressure to maintain the cars in a good way. Take the next slide, please. So this short story, what is it telling us? It's telling us that connectivity, compute, and software has a major impact on the value creation. And so this is the car industry may be a precursor, but we will see this across the entire line of equipment being manufactured, more or less. All value chains will be affected. And the question is, how will Europe be able to handle this situation where some strongholds we have had in the past, we are excellent in producing white goods, apparels, whatever you can imagine. Europe carries many, many strong brands in the consumer market. Now the question is, how can we maintain that position when we're into this shift? We see this revolution going from mechanics to electronics, going into the software, the cloud. How will we be able to handle this? Because there will be potentially a shift in power balances across the world here. And this is what we're trying to put forward in this project. So we go to the next slide. Just like I said, this is just illustrating it from a different angle. I mean, as we move value from, let's say, mechanical, putting together, assembling systems into electronics and software, there is this shift of value creation going into electronic components, the systems that reside inside the chips and the software on top of that. And here we see, if we look into the European share of the global electronic value chain, we see that so we're moving into a domain where Europe is strong to a domain where Europe is rather weak, at least relatively speaking here. And that is a challenge for us. So we see that value is all of a sudden being moved away from our strongholds. And the big question is, how will we be able to counteract and sort of meet this challenge in Europe? And that is what this workshop is all about and what we have been working on in the project now for 2 years. We'll take the next slide. Because there is a harsh reality we need to deal with. Europe has a very strong microelectronic industry. And the problem is that it has close to zero impact on the global software ecosystem. So at the very top of the value chain, we have small impact. If we go one step down, we see that big giants, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, Intel, ARM, they invest heavily in software as well. They're leading, let's say, chip manufacturer or chip producers, and they shape the ecosystem to a large degree. They set the scene that everyone has to relate to. And the problem is that Europe, being strong at the bottom here, we have a very slim chance of influencing with our innovations today how that ecosystem will evolve. We will reside at the bottom of the value chain, and unless we start investing in moving upwards here, it will be very problematic to stay in a leadership position. We will be a follower to a large degree. What other parts of the world and other companies and other, let's say, ecosystems are developing. And that is a challenge that we need to address. So if we take the next slide. There is simply no time to wait. In COREnect, we have outlined a few areas where we believe we must really pay more attention to and where we need to invest. And Fredrik will tell us more about this. Just like to highlight 3 pieces here in the white paper. That is that we should invest in digital infrastructure. We should secure our leading position there. This is an innovation platform. If you have this in place, creativity will be unleashed, and we will see a lot of innovations coming along. We also would like to have coordination when it comes to R&I funding programs. We need to address both long-term programs like we have in SNS KDT environment and the joint undertakes, to address the value chain perspectives, being able to sort of handle a very complex formation of entities working together. But we also need the flexibility to have short-term actions, like we've seen very efficiently now during the COVID period, where Europe very swiftly were able to put together activities to meet challenges. We need to have that in our industry as well. And then complementary actions, more from a societal point of view. How can we make sure that we have a sound balance between regions in the world, so we have fair competition, we have a fair support from authorities, that we have what we call a level playing field, and that would be very important, of course. And the bottom line, we must be able to attract good people, work, study, live in Europe, and being part of our ecosystem. So by that, I'd like to hand over the word to you, Fredrik, who can share more pieces from the recommendation side.
Thank you, Fredrik. So we can move to the next slide. So as it has been said by Fredrik, inside COREnect, we did deliver 3 main deliverables. The core being D3.6, which is basically the complete technology roadmap. It's a very dense document, so then we propose kind of an executive summary, which is basically D3.7, in order to give you a generic idea regarding what are the main recommendations coming from the expert groups, and then you can dig in more in detail into D3.6. So before describing this, let's say, high-level synthesis, just few words regarding the main idea which has been driving this work. So basically, as it has been said by Fredrik, intent of COREnect is to make sure that on the long run, Europe will be able to secure its presence in the overall supply chain and value chain. And one of the key discussions we had was concerning, does it mean, do we have to own the full value chain or not? And basically, the conclusion we end up is no, we do not need to do this. Basically, the idea is to focus on essential parts by mastering advanced and competitive technologies, and then inducing mutual dependencies with other regions. So sovereignty does not mean full independence. The point there is to make sure that create dependency and that Europe is capturing the value it deserves. So just to make sure what are the hypotheses behind this work. If we move to the next slide. So the way deliverable D3.6 has been made, so the complete roadmap, we define a roadmap in 3 steps with short term before 2026, medium term 2026 to 2030, and long term beyond 2030. So basically, what we will be presenting in the following slide is a synthesis of, according to this timeline, of what has been proposed by the expert group. But on top of this, we have added a political level, a more transverse recommendation and guideline proposal, just in order to highlight some key points that we need to secure in order to make sure that we have the appropriate context in Europe to be successful in the implementation of this roadmap. So if we move to the next slide. So it's basically this transversal section that we call, let's say, political level recommendation guidelines. So it's coming in echo to what has been previously said both by Mr. Secarelli and Fredrik. So we can start, for example, with point 4, which is basically supporting existing key assets in Europe regarding manufacturing. And then point 3, which is addressing one of our key dependencies regarding the access to leading-edge technologies. But then we also have one key point, which is point 2, which has been raised by many partners, which is standardization, because as it has been said, it's playing a key role in our capacity to generate and capture value through IP. So that's something that needs to be boosted and supported with insensitive, for sure. Then one point, which is less technical, it is mainly politically driven, are point 1 and point 7. So it's related to spectrum allocation and deployment. That's something that has been intensively discussed. One of the reasons which make China very successful with 5G is related to their commitment and the very aggressive planning they deploy for 5G. So, and clearly that's something that today is perhaps missing. We have some margin of improvement there, and that's clearly something that needs to be improved at political level. We need to have the will there to make sure that we target an aggressive deployment to enable this infrastructure, as this has been said by Frederick. And it's coming in echo with point 7, where during this deployment phase, dedicated strategic infrastructure program could be a boost in order to make sure that the infrastructure is available in Europe and that it's helping to support the deployment in this very early stage. Last but not least, point 5, adapt policy to geopolitical tension. The world around us has changed. And so for sure, in order to make European player able to play the same game, at some point, we need there to have appropriate tool, which we cannot define for ourselves, for sure. So it gives you a global overview regarding the general idea which has been proposed, which should enable to create the environment in Europe to be successful. If we move to the next slide, and we'll focus now on the short term. So the idea there is first to secure and strengthen the key asset we have in Europe, and it's illustrated from point 1, 2, and 3. So basically, continue to strengthen and support the manufacturing of, let's say, derivative technology available in Europe, and also EDA solution. And then one key point, which has already been mentioned, which was point 7, make sure that the attractivity and competitiveness of European academic universities remain top-notch in order to address the skill shortage. So it's one very important issue which has been discussed numerous times in COREnect. Then we have a more generic recommendation regarding open hardware and open software. So from point 4, 5, and 6, which are basically leveraging on the previous slide, please. Thank you. So basically, the idea for point 4, 5, and 6 is to leverage the key assets available in Europe in order to develop the appropriate hardware to be able to capture more value at system level. And finally, point 8, just to recall people that it's not just a technical discussion, and that we need to take care to the acceptance, especially regarding data sharing to the consumer. So now looking a little bit at more midterm on the next slide. So the first message is related to point 1 and 3. So basically, then the focus is more on, let's say, the design capability of both digital and analog in Europe, to make sure that first we have a pool of resources, of, let's say, relevant resources on this in order to not lag behind, and then be able to fuel the establishment of a European fabless ecosystem, which is almost not existing today in Europe. And so then strengthening this design capability and ecosystem, it can be leveraged in point 2 and 5 in order to fuel the technology requirement and be able to move to higher level, leveraging existing technology and moving to the chiplet design style, or providing a domestic request for more advanced technologies and be able to support the establishment of a leading-edge technology in Europe. So basically, that was the idea at midterm. And finally, if we look at the last slide regarding the very long-term roadmap. So basically, point 1 and 3 are coming in echo to the previous slide. So it's basically to secure the technology roadmap, leveraging the key asset we already have on mature and derivative technologies, and the requirements and needs that will be created from the digital side, strengthening the fabless ecosystem. And finally, point 2, which is coming in echo to Frederick's presentation regarding the fact that even if we do this in order to move up in the value chain, at some point we are missing a system company in Europe able to drive both standardization and software activity. And so at some point, it will already also be necessary to address this point in order to make sure that we have a complete understanding of the value chain and that we are able to act as European and not just follow. So I think it's a good high-level summary of what has been said inside COREnect. And then if you would like to have more details, you can then dig inside deliverable 3.6 in order to go more in the technical details. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for this great presentation of some of the highlights of the COREnect roadmap. As I say, if any of you in the audience have any questions, you may write them down in the chat box. So now, just a second. So it is time now. We have reached a point where we would like to discuss some of the views and recommendations from the COREnect roadmap. Therefore, I am very pleased to introduce our first panel of the day. As I told you during the introduction, Yannick Zhu, the COREnect technical manager from TU Dresden, will moderate this panel. And I invite all panelists to open their webcam. And Yannick, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Sorry, good morning. So first of all, sorry that apology that unfortunately Gerhard get very ill right now and cannot join us. But okay, he's joining us on his front step. So Gerhard, wish you get well very soon. So now today we have heard so much from Marco about what is going on in the European landscape, such as KDT, SNS, Joint Undertaking, IPSI, and most important, CHIPS Act. And we also have heard about a COREnect roadmap. And so maybe it is time to have different opinions on what will be actually the required strategy actions to address our concern on sovereignty and trustworthiness in critical connectivity infrastructure. Today, we have a very great 4 panelists to join us. So I would first of all invite all panelists to say a few words about themselves. And so maybe we can start from Peter.
Good morning to everyone. Many thanks for organizing this super interesting workshop. And we read the roadmap with a lot of interest, and it's really rich and inspiring. So I'm working in the European Commission, heading the team on 5G, 6G policy in DG Connect, and so complementing Marco from this morning, who is running or at least the Commission participation in the KDT and the future CHIPS JU. And we're in my unit, we have, of course, the 5G policies, something like 5G action plan, also building up these ecosystems that were mentioned by Frédéric and Frédéric in the previous talk, and also then the research pillar, which is then this Smart Networks and Service Joint Undertaking, working also with the member states. And hopefully we can discuss this in this panel or the next one, how to then look at these different recommendations in the roadmap and see a bit who does what. We already talked about the cooperation between the 2 JUs, the CHIPS JU and the SNS JU. There has been the signature of the Infrastructure Association for the MOU, very, very promising. But then also see a bit how we can leverage these huge challenges that we see in this roadmap, which is very good because it's very much in the spirit of the CHIPS Act that Marco presented. But now we have to make it reality. And there certainly are different elements in the roadmap that we see, from the skills that were underlined also at the end of the presentation, where we have been taken up in the digital decade strategy. So that's very much on our mind in the Commission in general, not only in the line units on 6G and CHIPS, but in general, digital skills. Then we have the ecosystem building, the rollout policy, also very much on the digital decade strategy, and we're working with member states very hard to make that happen, building the ecosystem, building the infrastructure with the verticals. And then finally, the R&I challenges that we have at the core of this roadmap, So there we can dive a bit deeper, hopefully later on the how we can do that, how we can bring the players together, how to use the different programs. There is money now more than before. We'll see if it's enough, but probably never enough, but the ambition has been raised. So that's just for the opening and looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Peter. So now I give floor to Ben. Maybe you can speak a few words.
Yes, good morning to all of you. My name is Ben Ruuk. I work for the Netherlands Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. And I'm specifically involved in three areas that are also relevant in our discussion today. The first one is I'm one of the Dutch delegates to the Key Digital Technologies Joint Undertaking, where the Netherlands is also actively participating. Furthermore, I'm involved in the Dutch participation of the important project of common European interest, Microelectronics and Communication Technologies. We have quite some Dutch submissions in this field, and it's the first time that the Netherlands has been active in an IPCI, and that seems a bit strange because we have, let's say, important parts of the value chains active in the Netherlands, industrial parts. But to be honest, what we also needed was a change in national policy, where an active industrial related policy was not so much, let's say, a given case in the past in the Netherlands. We were more as a ministry facilitating industrial efforts, but not taking the lead in some processes. We have changed that, particularly also with regard to the developments in the geopolitical sphere in the field of semiconductors. So in that sense, we became more active, and this increased activity also led to a new available budget to really support these efforts. And in the third field, I'm also involved in the Eureka Cluster Program, an intergovernmental initiative that was already present before we had the EU joint undertakings, but a program that also incorporates European and even with third countries collaborative R&D&I in various fields, and we are particularly involved in the fields of semiconductors that's being addressed by the cluster XECS, and embedded and distributed systems that is being addressed in the cluster ITIA4. And we think that these forms of, let's say, European industrial collaboration are really extremely important to achieve one of the goals that we are discussing today. Particularly in the Netherlands, we think that realizing these ambitions by working together at a European and an international level really can make a lot of difference. So in that sense, our budget goes mainly into these type of programs. For now, I would like to leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So now maybe we can, Julia, you can say a few words.
Thank you very much. My name is Julia Sińska, and I'm heading International Relations and Strategic Advocacy at Nokia's Government Affairs team. Nokia, so we create technology to help the world act together, and it is our technology that is behind 6.6 billion mobile subscriptions worldwide and 500 million fixed broadband lines that connect citizens, that connect businesses. And so through mobile, fixed, optical, and IP networks, we advance technology for the fourth industrial revolution. And to do that, of course, we need to be in technological avant-garde, having access to the leading edge chips for all those four domains that I've mentioned. So we are working on development of those throughout Europe. We have worldwide 11 excellence centers for chips development, and 7 of them in Europe, in Finland, Belgium, Germany, Poland, Italy, and UK. And then, of course, those act together in concerted manner also with development centers in Canada and in the US. and overall more than 1,100 chips engineers located in Europe. So with that, we really encourage to think strategically about chips, as this is what defines the future competitiveness for us, but broader for European economy. We are strongly convinced about that. So we feel that political attention to the matters of chip supply chain and their advancement is fully merited. And as such, we are therefore supporting the CHIPS Act proposal. And on the more concrete manner of things that are already in the pipeline, we are also hoping to see the advancement and IPCEI in action as we are waiting for triggering it. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So last, maybe Ingrid, you can say a few words.
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. So I am from IMEC, and in IMEC, I'm driving the research in the deterministic networking program, which fits in the broader connectivity program. So I'm mainly looking at end-to-end connectivity, and we are mainly targeting more private, professional, industrial environments and use cases. So in order to have this end-to-end connectivity, we are actually overlooking many things. I'm looking at it from an end-to-end system perspective, looking at all layers in protocol stack, which is going from very low level PHY analog front ends up to the application layer, and also across multiple networks, wired, wireless, whatever. So although I'm working on end-to-end, I'm more involved with analog and microelectronics that is already quite major. Otherwise, it's impossible to build this kind of systems. But I have very good connections with my colleagues in the advanced RF team that are working on future technologies that are looking, for example, at sub-terahertz communication. Maybe I can also say that I am embedded in Ghent University, so I also have a strong link with the academic world. And maybe finally a link that is perhaps less familiar to you, but maybe relevant for these discussions. I also have a link with the Astrid, which is the Belgian organization that is responsible for crisis communication. And they are now in a very important transition period, moving from migrating from older Tetra technology towards 5G for crisis communication. So also this gives me a lot of insights in the need for critical infrastructure. So I think this is a kind of introduction. But from my background, I also realized I was starting from high-level networking down to very low-level PHY. And I also realized the importance of having access to advanced microelectronic chips for future innovation.
Thank you, Ingrid. And so now we have roundtable introductions from the panelists, and we know who they are and how they are relevant to this discussion. And so maybe we can, so we have heard so much the importance of microelectronics for connectivity. Maybe we come back a little bit to the from the top that, so we are kind of, I think this has been mentioned many times, but it cannot be emphasized enough that we are in really the age of digitalization. The telecommunication is really the important infrastructure for our 21st century. So it is really becoming the backbone of our economy and the society, and also it carries all the data, personal industry data, that is so important for our sovereignty. And it is also defines our future in terms of innovation platform and knowledge. So now we want to ask our panelists, what's your perspective? Do you think this is really the case? And so especially for this cellular communication we are talking about. And if so, what would be your actions or your company or your organization action recommendations so that make sure that our society will have reached right level of connectivity to, to support this digitalization. Maybe we can start from Julia. You have mentioned that Nokia has done so much as a company to connecting the world. So what would you see? I would guess the first question about is telecommunication important would be yes. So what would you see the perspective, the importance of digitization and how we can achieve this right level of connection? Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very safe bet from you to expect that I will be indeed supporting the introductory statement that you've made. I believe indeed in importance of telecommunications and on keeping us connected to act together as we have it defined in our purpose for the company. And we can observe how connectivity has changed the world up until today, but we also look at what can still happen going forward. And I think that's the most strategic piece to look at to understand how to prepare ourselves for the future. So we are looking already at the next step at industrial metaverse, which will basically converge what is physical with what is virtual, and merge digital and physical reality into one, not just for the sake of entertainment, as it is now very much looked at, not just for the sake of human augmentation, which should not be understood as making us cyborgs, but rather gaining insights into our human body to learn, predict what may happen, and improve our lives through those digital insights. But most importantly, and where the great premise lies, is with this industrial aspect of metaverse, which is when every physical asset which makes sense to be connected will be connected, and through 6G in the future we'll be able via digital world to manipulate the very physical world, to reduce waste, to increase productivity, to optimize processes, to gain insights and experiment into digital world before taking action in the real world, to do things the first time right. And that's, of course, just a vision. We need to now make it happen, and that development is ongoing. So by 2030, we believe that this industrial metaverse will start to materialize at scale. And what it takes? Well, it takes very powerful compute capabilities, but also it takes new networks which will be robust, flexible, and extremely powerful, because it's about even more reducing latency versus what we achieved with 5G. It's about huge bandwidth and uplink bandwidth when you think about how we will be uploading things to the metaverse, to create the metaverse. It's about edge processing capabilities. It's about sensing networks with a sixth sense to gain insights in and understanding and awareness of what's happening in the real world and around. It's about super accurate positioning and synchronization. So to achieve all of that and the promise that it brings, we need to continue developing technology, and we need to have leading edge chips to make it happen.
So maybe we go next to Ingrid. And we know that you have very solid technical background from the top to the end. So what do you see? Do you think maybe it is, do you think this telecommunication is really important for our future? And what do you think should be done in order to make sure that the society have the right level of connectivity, as Julia just mentioned?
Yeah, I think connectivity is extremely important for the future, but I see connectivity, of course, I'm a bit biased from my research background, but I see connectivity more general. I think telecommunications and cellular is a very important part in this connectivity, but I also see it a bit broader. There are more technologies that can help to realize this connectivity. And I think connectivity is extremely important for connecting society. That is one thing. But from my research background, we are also focusing more on professional and private areas. So we not only have to focus on connectivity of everyone, which is a really prime concern, but we also need connectivity for professional environments. And the problem is a bit that the goals are often, or the requirements or the needs can be quite different, while the consumer market is still the biggest one and is still driving lots of innovation. We see also today in 5G that, for example, the dedicated functionality that is needed for crisis communication or low latency for industrial automation, it is in the pipeline, it is coming, but it is much slower. And I think we are waiting for that to also serve the needs, these specific needs, which are not necessarily huge markets or which not necessarily lead to big economic benefits. So now I am putting on my hat of Astrid, crisis communication infrastructure. They need very specific functionality to guarantee connectivity, but this is not the same functionality that is today deployed for more the commercial public networks. So in that sense, I think we need more flexibility, more possibilities for innovation, and also in case, because whatever it takes, I'm now in this area for a long time, whatever it takes, you need more flexibility and more customization if you go for more professional markets. So I think if we go for the new technology, that flexibility is key, that also interoperability is key, although cellular, because of their spectrum, because of their advanced ecosystem, is probably in the best position to offer the best guarantees. But many situations have seen that cellular alone is not enough. We have seen that in very critical situation, terror attacks, the floods last year in Belgium, the Pukkelpop concert, rock concert scenario, where we have seen that cellular has failed, and where, for example, Wi-Fi and WhatsApp has been used to serve crisis communication. So my thing would be, what is important is flexibility, interoperability to offer the best possible service, and also openness, because openness is driving innovation. We need access to more open platforms at all levels, not only the software level, but also at the chip level. Today we are doing some work, just to give an example, and I'm not saying that it is better than cellular, but we have a fully open platform on Wi-Fi, and it really drives innovation because we can do innovation at the digital chip level. And I think we also need bring 5G to the level that we have flexibility at all levels, that we can innovate at all levels, that we can vertical integrate at all levels to bring the services that are needed for many different application environments, going from industrial automation up to Metaverse, up to reaching the connected society. Yeah, so my recommendations is by also promoting more advances and more possibilities in the microelectronics world, because today we are a bit stuck. For example, radio modems, it's not just about infrastructure. Infrastructure is evolving fast, but radio modems and devices is coming much later, which is a problem if you want to do end-to-end innovation. You need functionality everywhere. You need flexibility and possibility for innovation and customization everywhere along the chain.
Thank you, Ingrid. So now I want to ask Peter. So we have heard the beautiful vision of Nokia about metaverse or industry metaverse. And I also heard about Ingrid, about her vision that it is beyond the cellular communications and important, of course, both of the importance of microelectronics in this thing. So from European Commission perspective, what would be your view on this topic, and what would be your recommendations?
Yeah, maybe some points how we're addressing this challenge. So I think this question is more on the infrastructure side, of course, as the basis for having these ecosystems evolving, for having the new services coming. The metaverse, certainly for 6G, will be building on the infrastructure that we have by 2030, right? So that's a kind of precondition to develop this infrastructure now, to lead, well, for 5G, 5G for everyone, 5G and fiber. That's the digital decade target, the gigabit target for everyone. But also, as Ingrid pointed out, some more local innovations like private networks provided by MNOs or by local providers. So we have different models there. And then, of course, also the challenge of transport paths. Yeah? So this, when we start 5G in urban areas and then scale it up to the wide area, we also have to focus on the main market failures, which are also in the transport path. So we're developing these 5G corridors and trying to get this infrastructure out where it's needed, and also address market failures. Talking about market failure, when you look how much does this cost, this infrastructure, there were some recent studies. You can say roughly for the digital decade targets, fiber and 5G, probably 300 billion, 150 billion each for fiber and for the fixed, and then for the 5G. So, and then of course there are some links between the two. But then there is a funding gap of, say, around 50 billion, maybe in that order. So one thing is to set the framework conditions right. And I think some speakers before talked about spectrum. That's of course very important to have the spectrum resources there, to have it harmonized, also the assignments that they work timely and then coordinated. And then other conditions like investment conditions. They have to be set in a way that this is attractive. And then we have the public funding, especially now during COVID. We've seen this rising. So we have the Next Gen EU fund, where we're now stepping in areas where there is market failure. The market failure increased certainly in this environment. And we are then addressing that also with public funding programs. Think about Connecting Europe facility, but also the recovery funds in the member states. So yeah, that's how we approach it. But that's certainly, I would say, a precondition for success. And this, if you look at the COREnect roadmap, this is one of the elements there. Yes, we have to make sure that these ecosystems are building up, and this goes very much also through the infrastructure, to the deployments. But then we have to address the huge challenges that we see on the microelectronic side, where we lag behind or we lost ground on key areas. And this we have to do apart from the infrastructure deployment. So we have really to invest, and that's the CHIPS Act. Yeah? That's why it came separately, very ambitious now from the Commission, on top of the digital decade strategy, or let's say developing one of the areas of the digital decade strategy, where we really have to invest massively and smartly. And that's why we need the roadmap to see what are the areas where we have opportunities and where we should now go forward and invest.
Thank you, Peter. So last, maybe we can ask Ben. So as I understand your introduction, your background is more related to microelectronics and the chips. So what would you be your perspective on this digital infrastructure, and what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, what I said, and previous speakers also said that yeah, we can hardly overestimate the importance of telecommunications. I was involved years ago at the end of the previous century in the discussions on the fully opening up of the European telecommunications services market, the famous liberalization. I think what we saw happening there, it was really a very challenging effort we made together, trying to break down the power of national operators and include the market in this. What it resulted in was an enormous, let's say, explosion of new activities. And what we saw now happening is mainly also due to the fact that we had the guts to indeed take very significant steps here. So in that sense, I think what public authorities can do, firstly, of course, is foster innovation. That's what we are doing in the Netherlands. Try to give an impulse to really new areas. Let's not forget that Europe and European industry was one of the initiators of the mobile technology development in the past. We were really at the forefront at the time, so maybe that is something we should try to regain. Furthermore, I would say the important roles of governments, national but also European, the European Commission is provide the appropriate legislative and regulatory environment and framework so that we really facilitate the development of new, for instance, 5 and 6G applications. There is mainly a role of the public authorities. And indeed, what I said, my background is in business economics, not in the technology. But what I already said before, I think it is very important that we jointly make an effort, Europe-wide, make an effort to support these new elements, these new developments. And what was said earlier in the large programs we've got, the joint undertakings, but also now in the initiatives in the field of important projects of common European interest, there really is a very strong basis to do that. And what I think is very important, if we bring these efforts at the national level together, we can also, let's say, avoid overlaps in investment efforts. We can use developments that have already been taken up in other countries and with other companies in order to avoid duplication of work. So I think that joint effort could really give us a couple of steps ahead of our competition. And obviously, an element we should also bear in mind, particularly at the current geopolitical framework, elements like safety and security are of the essence here. Telecommunications is an asset, but can also provide a very significant risk to our national securities and our European security. So that is also an issue we really should take into account. Thank you.
And so we have heard a lot about this importance of digital infrastructure. For sure, we agree on that. At the moment, we are in the phase of 5G rollout. This is very critical for the success of the Europe. So, and also potentially it could be also drive the demands of chips in the Europe, because we are talking about a lot about the developed chips in the Europe, but in the end, this is a free market. We need to have the market. So, and also potentially very important, first we have 5G rollout in Europe, and then we can think about 6G. So what do you think about this role of 5G rollout, and do you have any successful story that to help us, to encourage us to do so? And from your organization point of view, do you see this is how do you think this can be done to help become a top priority? So maybe I can.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Yanning. I would have to ask the panelists to be quick in their response, and there are also a couple of questions from the audience afterwards. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So maybe I can start to ask maybe 5G rollout from the policy maker, from Peter, your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Janning. Indeed, very interesting question. How can we approach that? So I think in the roadmap we see interesting avenues there. What I found interesting is to see, on the one hand, we have this challenge of catching up. So in some areas it's okay, you could say this, why are we behind? Because maybe for Europe the market is not so attractive. In some areas maybe also the scale, the number of devices to be sold, if you think about network infrastructure, is maybe not so high to really invest so massively from a private perspective. So there we have to help and say, what are the areas where we need to be there? So for example, you use the term platform chips, right? These are probably so important also from a sovereignty perspective that we play a role here, that we also see what we can do publicly to to somehow go back into this game or catch up. So that's the catching up, which is necessary, and then also looking at the future opportunities and the transformation of the ecosystem of the supplier side, for example, softwareization, cloudification, open interfaces are of course there to be looked at. And then we have the new opportunities, and I think that was already mentioned by Julia on the visions that we have for 6G, and we have the flagship project HexaX now, that and other projects that are really looking what could it look like in terms of categories. We don't know the services certainly now, but we can think in categories. We can say what are the technology opportunities here that could enable these future applications, and how could they look like. So that's a very interesting exercise, very important one. And there we can see what are the new opportunities. And there you have this interesting avenue in the or pillar, what you call the sensing. Yeah, if we have higher frequencies, we're coming closer to the materials. You have these opportunities of digital twins, and these things are probably quite new. And there can be certainly opportunities here in chips, and see that we can around this ecosystem also have then leading positions. Yeah, so I see it a bit in these two dimensions, catching up in areas where we need to and where opportunities, and then what are the new areas.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Maybe we can ask Ben also from the member states' point of view. What's your perspective?
Well, to be honest, I've not that much to add to what was said by Peter at the moment. What I think is in the Netherlands, our policy usually is we try to be active in the support of new developments, but we will never do that purely from a national basis. Our instruments we have in place always have a requirement that there will be European or international cooperation. That is always a criterion. And that one reason for that is that we are, of course, although we are a small country, our interest in the field of let's say high-tech systems like microelectronics, like software, is quite present. Of course, we have let's say many elements and of the value chain within our borders, and particularly also in the equipment sector with a company like ASML. The Netherlands is one of the leading companies in a very important part of IC production. But what we always try to stimulate is that companies and academia find partners cross-border. That is what we think is essential to innovate and to renew, and that is where we focus our efforts and our means on. So that just in an as a contribution to what was already said by Peter.
Thank you, Ben. So maybe Julia, from Nokia perspective, what do you see this topic?
Yeah, so you asked why quick rollouts are important. So let me throw in a couple of statistics. When pandemics broke, we've researched how it affected the companies, the enterprises. And the effect of the research was that the companies which were at the early stages or rather not very mature in their digitalization experienced 40% drop in productivity immediately after following the start of the pandemics and lockdowns. But the companies which were 5G ready were the only category which actually had a net positive, experienced a positive increase in productivity despite all of that. Statistic number one. Statistic number two. We are in Europe very much focusing on greening our economy, on cutting the emissions. And it's been researched by Accenture that 5G will be behind and will contribute to 20% cuts and contribution towards carbon emission targets by 2025. That is significant, I would say, to help us to go towards the greener path. And maybe a third statistics from our own field, how 5G impacted something we experienced ourselves when we implemented 5G related use cases in our own factory in Oulu in Finland. We immediately saw a productivity jump of 30% in just a year. So yes, 5G brings real advancements. And the second part of the question is how, what's my organization role in making it happen? Of course, we develop the technology, we help standardize it. And here I need to stress that we need to keep a global system, global standardization and incentives for the companies to contribute towards the standardization. And then finally, when it comes to deployment, this is about all the positive actions that the governments are doing to enable create the environment that is conducive to investments in the infrastructure. But so far, with 5G, we had a good experience with having a common target, for instance, for spectrum availability, but we didn't perform, right? The result, there was only one member state which actually released spectrum in all 3 bands against the target set. So we need to do better for the 6G round.
Thank you, Julia. So maybe Ingrid, you can say a few words.
Yeah, I think I can align with what was already said by Peter Stuckmann, that indeed it's important that we have 2 parts, I think. One part is to catch up, and the other part is to look at future enabling technology opportunities, because even for today's system, I think in Europe we have been focusing and we are quite strong on the softwarization aspect, but in order to benefit from softwarization, you need powerful hardware below that can be exploited. So I think we still have to catch up. I feel that in the educational system, I feel that in the research, it's very hard to find the right profiles. I think we are very strong at the software level, at the AI level, at the high level software. But we need, if we want to bring new technology, if we want to innovate at all levels, we also need designers. We also should be able to build the full systems to do the vertical integration, which involves a lot of design, also co-design. Not only within one specific components, but in the end, all the components, all the levels, they have to work together. So I think there is still a lot of room for innovation if we build further on the current, let's say 5G, even 5G beyond. And yeah, in parallel, I think we also have to be prepared for the future where Europe can take the lead again and focus on more leading edge technologies. It's much longer term, but we have to prepare, and I think we can still learn a lot by catching up with the current technologies that may be already more major, let's say in the analog domain, but we are lacking a lot of skills in the digital domain and in the mixed signal, analog digital domain. But I think it's in line with what has been said before.
And thank you, Ingrid. So you brought us a very important point about the skills and education. Of course, we need to really work on that. So, but before we summarize our panel, maybe we get some questions from the audiences. The first is from France to ask, how do you see the role of Satcom on the way forward? So maybe Peter, you can start with this.
Sure. No, that's of course, Satcom is one of the components. If you talk about the network of networks. So of course, as already the case before, it's a very important component, especially when you go to more remote areas to provide the backhaul and the connectivity there. So I think this will continue to play a role. It's also important when you think about verticals and critical communications, that you have a fallback mode or something where cellular might not be available. So this is nicely complementary. And we have seen very important developments. I think it was last week where important adoptions were done in 3GPP to really make it a reality, to have the satellite interface that we are always dreamed about since many framework programs that we have been working on that with these interfaces in the standards. So that's an important progress. And then we have, of course, when you talk about constellations, and there you have, of course, huge investments. And we had this secure connectivity proposal that is now being developed, and also a lot of ambition behind from the Commission, where we would have then new systems that are also providing secure connectivity. And then we have to look at opportunities, how this works together in the service landscape that we talk about, especially when it comes to critical services. So lots of opportunities. We have achieved a number of things here, important things, and we can, and of course, if you look at SNS, Management Services, like in the 5G PPP, we have continued to have lots of Satcom companies involved, and that's part of the team.
Thank you, Peter. Any further comments from panelists?
Yeah, I think in terms of Satcom, it's of course very important and as fallback or as complementary mode of communication, which was a bit in line with what I said before, that interoperability is an important feature to be looked at in the future. Interoperability at different level. It could be between different technologies, between terrestrial, between satellite, between interoperability across borders. I think and the satellite communication can be very valuable extra technology that can, in particular, indeed, for critical communication service, it can be a high added value. But I think not only for critical services, there can be other services that benefit also from satellite communications.
Okay, thank you, Ingrid. We have another question. So on future use of 6G, that there's a need for secure information sharing. So maybe even by shared private hubs and also taking into account multi-site. So basically asking about the question about security and also ask us, do we consider this in the roadmap? Maybe I can say a few words about this. Actually, we do consider security. If you look at the roadmap in each strategic area, including computing, communicate, basically RF, and also sensing, we do have a category that you can see the table that there's a security trustworthiness that is beyond the security. You can see the what is relevant. But of course, I think also if panelists have anything further comment about the security, and please do so.
Maybe if I can jump in just very quickly from a perspective of how 6G is now being developed, because that's the space we are at. Security is taken into account from the very earliest stages of the development. And it needs to be so, because if we think that with 6G we'll have human interfaces of the networks, so it will become much closer to us. Of course, that will probably carry a lot of data, which indeed may be sensitive. So that's definitely something that is being taken care of and is high on the agenda.
Okay, Peter, please.
Yeah, just to give the pointer here, that many things are already happening in 5G. We have these private networks. So if you're interested in that, look at 5G ACIA, ACIA. They have developed a number of models how you can build private networks. And there you see already that you can have this, what you call here, shielded hubs. And 5G is one of the design goals of 5G, that you can enable this. So just to say, it's not only 6G. Of course, in 6G, we will mainstream that, certainly, but it's starting in 5G.
Yeah, I think there are different levels of sharing or securing. Initially, the idea was to offer the slicing on top of public, more commercial networks, which not so much desired. The feeling is, we are also involved in 5G Asia, that in factories, for industrial automation, people still want to share in their own private hub. So that's why indeed there is this evolution that where you can also deploy private networks that are decoupled. There are different ways of coupling these private networks. They could be completely shielded, or they could still have the possibility to have some link with public networks, depending on the type of connectivity that is needed. On the local side, it could be totally private, but you could also link multiple hubs. There are different options, and it is indeed exploring the 5G Asia organization. Yeah.
Okay, so despite a very interesting discussion, we need to conclude soon. So as a last comments, I would ask, we have discussed in this panel how important is digital infrastructure, from digitalization, from security, many aspects. And fundamentally, we need to game up with this chipset game. And if we look at what is happening, that Google, Facebook, everyone, Tesla, everyone is building their chips. So I would ask a panelist to give you a short final word about what do you see the importance, what can be done in the next step, concrete steps that we can help this Europe, to help this happen, to help Europe to win this game. So maybe we can start with Ingrid. Short.
I think I already addressed a little bit, but I think we should go higher up in this value chain. I think Europe is extremely strong if we look at microelectronics in the analog domain, and we have to go up and also get strong again, because I think in the past there was a lot of knowledge, but I think in the last maybe 20 years we have delegated a lot of the earlier knowledge to outside Europe. It's part of the globalization, where it turned out to be more economically viable to outsource a lot of those activities. I think we should bring back some of those activities to really master the full value chain, bring back. And I think most important is that we also bring in these profiles, design engineers that can help to build these end-to-end ecosystems. So yeah, I think that's my main recommendation for this discussion.
Thank you, Ingrid. I very appreciate it. So maybe Julia, so from your perspective, what would be recommended action?
So first of all, let's move quick to implement what has been already announced. So set IPK in motion, let industry start working on the implementation. And when it comes to the CHIPS Act, which covers very many domains here, my recommendation would be to focus on the strategic aspects of supporting the design portion of the ecosystem. We are not going to be able to recreate a full chip supply chain on the ground of Europe, and we don't need to. I don't think this is really a prerequisite to having access to chips, but the design portion, that's where the security control is. That's where we gain the advantages in terms of, for instance, energy efficiency and so forth. And that's where we have good basis, especially in the telecommunication side, because we've been designing some portions of the chips already on the ground in Europe for last year, so we can scale it up.
Okay, thank you. Scale up. Thank you, Julia. So maybe next, Ben. So what from Netherlands point of view, what do you see the recommendation or from member states?
Maybe a general and personal observation, if I'm allowed to. It's not an official position of the Netherlands, so let me say that in advance. What I see, particularly with these large initiatives we are now embarking on, like the important projects of common European interest, at the end of the day, much depends on, let's say, the capabilities, also the financial budgetary capabilities of individual member states. And sometimes you see very interesting initiatives, but involving very substantial investments, sometimes exceeding the capabilities of individual member states. And we are looking at initiatives of a common European interest. And I think that that might, let's say, hamper a little bit the the effectiveness of our efforts. Because at the end of the day, we're always looking at what can be done at the national level. What is the room in the national budgets? And sometimes I can imagine that there could be a bottleneck. And I haven't got an answer to this problem, but I think it's worth reflecting, particularly where we now see efforts that really need and ask for a common European approach. So there's maybe a role of the Commission, of the Union. I can't see it immediately because there are always difficult questions to address, but I could imagine that that could become an issue at a certain moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So maybe Peter?
Yeah, thanks a lot also, Ben, to this nice plaidoyer for the cooperation at European level. And it fits very well to what Julia said on the scale up. So we thought about that when we designed this Next Gen EU fund, where, of course, this was immediate money that was needed for member states to have the immediate crisis response, things happening on the ground just to make sure that people are paid when they don't work and so on. That was clear. But then on these kind of investments here, it's clear no member state can do it alone. This was part of the communication that we did in the Digital Decade strategy. And the answer to that was this multi-country project approach. And the IPCI is one of the instruments, and there can be others. And CHIPS is certainly one where we have to work together, that's for sure. Then just two final words on main things to do, also response to these big companies that are really dominating the scene. Ideally, of course, to create something like a European champion where also we have leverage and have the strength to respond to that. How to get there? I mean, we have the roadmap. The roadmap's principle, we follow it and we will get there because if we succeed. But then, of course, it's probably important because many things of the roadmap are happening somehow. We try on different angles, is to identify what are the big tickets here and where we have to design programs that are more ambitious that we know it, so that we set the scene and enable these new ambitious activities to be taken up. So that's an exercise that we will try to do now in cooperation as an SKDT with the industry associations to see a bit what are the focus areas where we have to not only bottom-up program where we put the money, but also really say this is the part that we want to boost now. So that could be one answer. And then in general, a follow-up of this roadmap to have review it regularly, to not just put it now on and then we read it and then we forget about it. So let's put something in place to follow that up regularly.
Thank you, Peter. So I think that's an excellent conclusion for this panel. So I thank you again, all the panelists, for your excellent discussion and contributions. So now I give the floor back to Jack.
Thank you so much, Yanning, and thank you to all of you who were in the panel for this very interesting and lively discussion. So it is now time for a few minutes break. We are a little bit late, not too much. So I would propose that we break for a few minutes and we are all back at 12:10 for the second part of the workshop. So you can, of course, stay online and please be back at 10 past sharp and we will start the second session. Thank you. Okay, so it's 12:10. So I would like to start by thank you again for participating in the COREnect Policy Workshop today. We are now in the second session of the workshop, and we are expecting intense debate and discussion on the topic of the required investments and actions in relation with policy support and building up the most effective pool of expertise to reach a European technological sovereignty in components for microelectronics. And I am pleased to introduce you to Patrick Pieper, Director of Strategic Partnerships at NXP, who will moderate panel number 2. Patrick, please proceed with the panel.
Okay, thank you, Jacques, for the introduction. Indeed, we have the panel on the topic you explained, and we have a number of people who are very experienced in the field. Just a short introduction. We have Leid Altimim, which is the president of SEMI Europe, but I understood that he is currently traveling in the airport and that his presentation will be given by René Claassen. Then as a second speaker, we have Cristiano Dubari, who is the head of the European Pole and International Relations at BPI France. As a third speaker, we have Kari Laino, who is from Business Finland. Fourth speaker is Britt Helle, head of Eureka Secretariat. Then we have Caroline Bedran, who is the General Director of INEAS and a member of the KTT Governing Board. And then we have Hector Donat-Ano, CEO of Fivecom company. And we have Colin Wilcock, who is the chair of the board's 6G Industry Association and the SNS Governing Board. So I think we have a lot of speakers. The way we will proceed is that every speaker will give a short introduction about the topic, and then we will have some questions within the panel and also with the audience together. And so I would like to give first the floor to René Claassen, and I will share my screen because he made some short presentation together with Leid Altimim. Let me see. So now you should see the presentation. Is that correct?
Yes, that looks great, Patrick and the team, and also to the organization committee. Thank you very much for inviting SEMI Europe to be part of this extremely interesting panel. I'm René Claassen, supporting Leid Altimim. I'm a former ASML and former NXP. And on behalf of SEMI Europe, we'd like to give a overall high-level introduction on the semiconductor world and what we are seeing. So today's world, there's a mega trends creating a need for people to communicate, to connect, to do things together, but also on the industrial level, as we've just seen. And I always like to use the word insatiable, because what is happening today is that the megatrends that we see are creating an insatiable end user demand, and that is boosting our worldwide microelectronics industry. And next slide, please, Patrick. And there's some pretty interesting changes that we're seeing. If you're looking at the microelectronics from the 1970s, there is the computers. It is a localized computing. We all went to the personal computings, the internet, the web, and then to the networking, mobile and social, but then also including equipment. We call that IoTs. Cloud computing came in. But that is actually every step is the increase of an application on top of what we already had, or the improvement of an existing application. Today, that is different. Today, we're not talking about a monolithic driver. We're talking about a complete explosion in applications we don't even understand yet, applications that will emerge in the coming 5 years. And we've decided to say, let's call that smart world, and where everything comes together, from the IoT, the wearables, the big data, the quantum computing, but also in the field of healthcare, like digital medicine, the connectivity, which is not only social connectivity, but which is also reflecting my question from the previous session. For example, a complete factory where equipment is only connected through a network, 6G. Next slide, please, Patrick. And that growth that we're seeing has been and still is and will continue to be exponential. You can see the graph on the left from the 1984s going up, looking at the semicon market, exceeding $1 trillion in 2030. And it's across all areas. It's a non-memory like the microprocessors, the high-end logic. It is the memory, which is DRAM, NAND, but also other memory with phase change materials that is coming in. So an enormous demand on the material market as well. And if you look at other ICs, look only at photonics, for example, discrete components, high frequency, analog, digital, mixed sensors. Across all the levels, the market is increasing exponentially. So it's doubling in the next decade. Next slide, please. So when you look, where is this all happening? Well, you look at this chart, and this chart shows the percentage of global manufacturing capacity that we have today. Like 10% is produced in the USA, the EU does 8%, China 20%, South Korea 20%, Japan 15%, and Taiwan 20%. So there's a lot of emphasis in the Southeast Asia. We already know that. USA still at 10%, but with very, very high-end, mainly CPU-driven circuits. And the EU is at 8%. One of the things we should not forget when we look at this picture is that we come from a 20% global market share. And we are now at 8%. When the market will double, and it will in the coming decade, we will be at 4%. And I think that is the awareness that was also very well taken up by the European Commission and by Ursula von der Leyen to launch the CHIPS Act. If we stay stable, we drop till 4%. If we want to stay at 20%, we want to regain the 20% market share that we used to have, we need to quadruple, actually 5 times, the manufacturing capability in microelectronics that we have today. Next slide, please. So I think I hear some talking in the background. It's definitely not me, but maybe somebody can mute his or her microphone. The European CHIPS Act, an extremely strong vision to jointly create a state-of-the-art European chip ecosystem. Won't go in that too long because there was a presentation on that earlier this morning. And I can only say that the semiconductor industry, microelectronics industry is very much welcoming this initiative. One of the things that we also need to realize is that when looking at the CHIPS Act and when looking at the ambition to grow our manufacturing capability, let's say quadruple that in the coming 10 years, we need a lot of skilled personnel to go into that. And we need to build that skilled workforce with an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Building a diverse workforce for the future of Europe. Next slide, please. So looking at the strategic objectives of the EU CHIPS Act, you see the 5 bullets from the CHIPS Act document. I would like to emphasize a little bit on the skills shortage to attract new talent. As we speak today, initiative together of the European Commission, Commissioner Breton, and the SEMI organization, Leith Altimim, my president, we took up some leadership to forge a cooperation on skilling and upskilling of people in Europe. We defined 3 blocks: an industry university network, an interest and awareness raising to make sure that also young people start to realize that working in microelectronics is something important, something good to do. And of course, overall focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. So with the executive board, you can see on the left, quite a lot of European organizations are represented. But even more important is that when you look at all the organizations on the right side who have endorsed the CHIPS, the Pact for Skills, who are supporting us, who we are talking with to really build a large program that will result in the coming 10 years in a pipeline engine, educating on master level, bachelor level, but especially on technical level, service level, maintenance level, to create the pipeline engine to educate about 500,000 people in the coming decade. 500,000. And that is about what you need if you want to realize the 20% manufacturing share ability that is the vision of the CHIPS Act. So these are big numbers. So let's go to the next slide. And we are well equipped to do that. Look at the assets that we have, at the power that we today see in design, manufacturing, suppliers, the RTOs. Look at the high-end companies like the automotive companies, the Thales, the Nokia, the Ericssons that are in there. But also look at the leadership that we have on not only semiconductor research, but especially on the analog, digital, mixed signal sensor integration that is so strong with NXP and with other companies in automotive. The enormous strength we have on lithography and equipment and materials, and on the mobile network equipment. And we've seen some examples of that in the discussions of the past hour. So are we ready for the challenge? Yes, I think we are. But do we have the time to wait long? And do we have the time to discuss a lot? No, I think not. I think the time to start is today. So I would like to go to some takeaways on the next slide, Patrick. So I think it's safe to state that today we are at the brink of a new wave of innovations, driven by connected objects and smart applications, and that will yield many opportunities for collaborations between many partners. Semicon sales, as the second takeaway, is expected to exceed the $1.2 trillion by 2030. And I don't know if other parties saw that coming a couple of years ago, but I can tell you, I was as senior management ASML in long-term strategy. 6 years, 7 years ago, we did not see that coming, not to this extent. So this is new, and this will absolutely open the opportunity for Europe to regain a lot of sovereignty when we act in the right way and when we fill in that CHIPS Act initiative that is really going to drive us to a lot more investments in Europe. And then we have everything it takes to complete in the data battlefield. We have the leading innovation RTOs, and we are able to invest to maintain leadership, also in R&D and in the core strength, and we make a resilient ecosystem. One of the things to touch upon as the latest, the workforce development, the diversity and the sustainability. These are our challenges and at the same time our pillars. We need to focus on that in parallel with all the other activities to build the fundament of a bigger Europe. And one more click, Patrick. Our industry can help to realize a safe, secure and sustainable digital transformation. And I think that will help societal and economical prosperity. And that is the view of the SEMI organization, actually a trade organization connecting 2,500 microelectronics companies worldwide. And I would like to thank you for listening. I only had 5 minutes. I hope I stayed within the time. And my apologies if some things went really fast. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, René. It was a bit longer than 5 minutes, but it was an interesting topic you mentioned, so we don't worry about this one. So now I would like to move to the next speaker, and that's Cristiano Dubari, who is the head of European Pole and International Relations at BPI France. So Cristiano, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for invitation. So I'm from BPI France, as you said, and we have the role of funding body on behalf of the government to implement R&D programs. bottom-up or sectoral, basically from TRL4, and we are also an equity investor and a fund manager with investments in the microelectronics and telecom sector at VC level, but also large caps, which is also a public commitment, a sign of public commitment to the development of the sector. A few words about the sectors in France. As you know, microelectronics is we have strong players like ST Micro, Soitec, XFAB, well-known players in research, CEA, LAS, CNRS, IMN, with 10K researchers. A track record in spin-off with Soitec, Sofradia, Tronics, Calray, and more broadly, several hundreds of companies in the sector, with a total workforce of 70K in the electronics area. For the telecom, also that there are large companies like Nokia and Ericsson with plants in France, and a number of French companies and SMEs involved in 5G, including 100 innovative companies with solutions for the networks, phone access networks and core networks, and leading labs as well in this area. So it means that both sectors are very economically very important for France, and also as a previous speaker said, the areas are key for sovereignty for France and Europe as well, of course. On current policy initiative, I will not comment on the proposed COREnect proposals, roadmaps. They are very interesting, rich outputs, but that they require, I think, in-depth and expert analysis. I will just highlight a few initiatives at the French level launched recently in these areas to contribute to the debate. First, on the microelectronics, I think that as we see the initiative at national and European level and more plugged. So I think in the first level, we can consider that to a certain extent, the French support is a component of European initiatives. This is true for KDT, the CHIPS Act, and the IPCEI on microelectronics, and also the Eureka ecosystem. As you know, that there are work in progress on this, on most of these programs. Just to say that France may dedicate 1.7 billion euro to the IPK on microelectronics and connectivity. So it's a potentially huge commitment. And that in addition, we have started preliminary to reflect on what could be useful synergies between this IPK and the Eureka XCCS component. Second thing I would like to mention on the electronics and microelectronics, we have launched recently initiatives aiming at relocating manufacturing activities in the context of the recovery program. Microelectronics has been addressed by a substantial number of projects with 78 selected projects. Supported through almost 100 million euro for 300 million euro of productive investment. So this is also a parallel effort towards sovereignty, less related to R&D, but for us it's quite key by now. The second component I would like to mention is on the telecommunication side, the national strategy on 5G and future telecom network launched in 2021 with 700 million euro of public funded to be committed by 2025 to leverage up to 1.7 billion of investment at the same year, 2025. There are priorities on both R&D and non-R&D. Non-R&D, it's about deployment and applications, and also training and education. It was previously mentioned as a key element. And on R&D, we have just closed the call on the development of sovereign solutions with the development of technologies on software, hardware services for the access network, core network, and the edge cloud, connected 5G terminals or private companies network. and also the launch R&D work on the virtualization of networks, opening up of interfaces on access networks, edge computing, network energy performance, network security, AI, and also management of heterogeneous connectivity of communication technologies. So this gives a brief view on what is being done in France. I think to summarize, I think it's that there is a clear window of opportunity in the current and next years for the sectors, because there are high public support available for the next years, and I see the challenges are maybe to maximize the synergies and the efficiency of the whole system of initiative, because it has become quite complex in terms of landscape. Also, I think it's key to avoid duplications and make the whole system simple for the players and sufficiently business oriented. So maybe a key element. We learned with 2 examples of projects we have been supporting at the interface between the telecommunication and the microelectronics. The first one with COREnect in the 5G program. The project will develop. Sorry, no, that's not that one. The project will develop a dedicated accelerator board for the 5G telecom market with a enhanced network acceleration, security, data processing, and storage capability, with application in telemedicine, industrial IoT, automated factories, smart city, and virtual reality. It's a collaborative project with COREnect, which is a well-known player, and 6Wind, Bull, and Orange. And the second one is a relocation project in the electronics and telecommunication with the company Kineis. It's a satellite operator and a connectivity provider for the IoT market. And the project concerns the development of a low-cost, long-range, and efficient electronic module for use in satellite IoT telecommunication terminals. And this is also about relocation and also about sovereignty in satellite IoT. Okay, so that's brief summary of what I wanted to share with you. And thanks again for inviting.
Okay, thank you, Christian. So we heard about the multiple initiatives and ideas from France, and now we would like to switch to Finland, where Kari Laino will explain the point of view from Business Finland. Please, Kari, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure, it's an honor, and yeah, it is really good to discuss these things with colleagues anyway. And I'm here representing a small member state with a low hierarchy, business culture, gender balanced, and trust-based society with free high quality education. So we are quite a happy nation, because we've been selected as the happiest nation 5 years in a row. So hoping to share some happiness here as well. And we have a strong and global mobile or telecom industry, but we also have a strong microelectronics ecosystem that is kind of based on MEMS sensors, RF technology, photonics, and quantum technology. So they are things that advance here, and we also participate a lot in those European common initiatives like Horizon Europe, where I also am the Finnish representative in the Cluster 4. And KDT, SNS, those partnerships are important to us. So while we are really in for all of these in our humble way in all of these initiatives. There are some things that could be improved, like the semiconductor industry in Europe, and Europe as an area could be more attractive to also global talents. We see some interest. We see a flow of talents into Finland, but that, as René so nicely showed us, it is not enough. And there I look at the industry that make it more, make yourselves more sexy for the younger generations, that they start studying the difficult parts of math so that they can become the new experts in this area. And what I would like to see also is a kind of a CHIPS Act for Dummies kind of a document. I would need that. Thank you. And then out of these joint endeavors that we are involved in, the IPCEI on microelectronics and connectivity is a bit complicated. And I get a lot of feedback from the industry that I really filter out, because some of it is unprintable. But could there be something that we could do with the IPCEI mechanism so that we would all row in the same direction? Now I get the feeling that half of the boat is rowing backwards and half of the boat is rowing forward, because there are at least 2 or 3 parts of the Commission that are not aligned in the interests of the industry, as I said. But thank you for the possibility of giving this introductory word, and I'll leave the floor to the next introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kari, for this clear message. So after we heard the point of view of 2 member states, we will now go to 2 associations which are involved in governing funding programs. And first we have Britt Helle, who is the head of the Eureka Secretariat. Britt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yeah, good afternoon now, everyone. Thank you very much for organizing this workshop, and also for inviting me as a Eureka representative to showcase our role in the sort of European funding landscape to sort of contribute to a vibrant market for microelectronics and components. So I will just make a sort of short introduction about what Eureka does, and then we can sort of continue the discussion. And of course, I have my colleague, I would say, Caroline Bédran, who comes after me, who is then particularly involved in the clusters, which is specialized on microelectronics. Yes, I hope you all know who we are, who Eureka is. We've been around for quite some time. It's an intergovernmental initiative which was started in 1985. And the main sort of idea of Eureka is to foster international collaboration, mainly focused on industry, small and medium enterprises, but also the industry leaders, and with a cooperation with the universities and research institutes. So we are today the world's largest such network, with 45 member states, or it's actually moving a little bit, sort of more than 45, because we're getting new global members in. So this is mainly European countries, but we also have countries like Canada and South Korea that are sort of big champions in innovation, and in particularly in microelectronics. So also, I think it's important to say that the European Commission is a member of Eureka. So there's a very sort of strong European component, and we also have co-funded programs with Commission funds under Horizon Europe. We have several instruments, but I think it's maybe what's relevant to sort of keep in mind. What is our specificity? Is that our sort of call for proposals, they are bottom up. So it's very much the industry and the companies themselves that decide which innovations are actually ready for the market. And it's also very close to the market. So we are funding projects that normally should be commercialized within the 3 years to come. there's a requirement that there must be entities from at least 2 countries collaborating, then sort of joining forces in order to learn from each other and to sort of drive benefit of this international collaboration. So I think there's also quite an educational aspect of this collaboration, which allows then knowledge and to the companies to actually expand and to learn. So I think that's also part of the skill, the skill component of this discussion, which I will not focus on anymore than that. We are of course a very small actor compared to the European Commission and the European programs. But I guess our strength, our sort of, how do we distinguish ourselves in this landscape, is that we try to have a low administrative burden for application for funding, so that it is sort of easy access. And I guess this is also the reason for why our programs are so much focused on small and medium enterprises, because it's quite, for those who know us, we're quite a popular or sort of it's a good instrument which doesn't require enormous efforts in order to apply. And that's what we try to continue to do. So by this, I hope I sort of showcase that Eureka is definitely part of the European funding landscape, which contribute to this innovative and vibrant microelectronics and connectivity ecosystem. I think I'll just allow myself to also say that our 2 biggest programs is the Eurostars program, which is a co-funded partnership with the European Commission, specifically focused on small and medium enterprises. So it's still bottom up, so it could actually be any innovation technology process. But of course, there's a big part of microelectronics here. And the second big program is the Eureka Clusters program, where we today have 5 clusters, and one of them is the XECS, which Caroline will talk more about. But we also have, now I sort of have to look at my notes here. So the 4 others are within, so we have Celtic Next, which is ICT. We have ITEA on software, and we have SMART on advanced manufacturing, and Erogia, which is focused on low carbon solutions. And one of the biggest advantages of the clusters is that they allow industry players and highly innovative SMEs to collaborate along the value chain. So here there's also a very important exchange of knowledge, learning, and sort of creating value, where I think that we have sort of many good examples that can showcase actually our contribution here. But again, I will leave the word to you, Caroline, to elaborate further. And I think nobody is operating in a bubble. International global cooperation is very important. And I think here again, the strength of the Eureka program is that we have global partners that can actually then enter into cooperation with the European companies, which should allow all to grow and to share. I think that's what I would like to say. I hope this is a relevance, and that it sort of puts us on the map of the European landscape within this field. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Britt. And as you mentioned, we now have Caroline Bedran, who is General Director of INEAS and member of the KTT Governing Board, who will give the point of view from that perspective.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you, Britt, for introducing Eureka and the Eureka clusters. Indeed, we are, as INEAS, we are operating XECS, the new cluster for electronic components and systems. In the past, there was Penta and Euripides in that field. And I fully support what you said, that the clusters are bottom-up, agile, friendly for SMEs with not too much admin burden. And that's something that we improve even year after year, listening to the needs of our community. When I say we operate XECS, it means we are the XECS office. We launch the calls, We evaluate the proposals with a group of experts. We discuss the funding possibilities with the countries which are involved. Then once the project is selected and funded, we monitor the projects until their very end, until they deliver impact. So we really, I would say, monitor the full value chain, or the full chain from the project ID to the very end, which gives us a good visibility on what is happening in the field. And we also try to be as close as possible to the partners, to support them at each step, especially when it is about SMEs who need, I would say, more support probably than the big companies or the research and technology organizations. It is a very flexible instrument. As you mentioned, 2 countries are enough. It's really cross-border, so I would say it's very suited to, I would say, a small to medium-sized project, like something in the range of 5 to, let's say, 30 million euro average of expenses. As we are an industry association, we are really representing our members, and we have a mandate from our members to support them through this landscape of funding instruments, which can be a little difficult to understand for newcomers. So our focus is, as I just explained, on XCCS, but we are also involved in the new Key Digital Technology partnership. We are a member of the private members boards, which means we represent industry in front of the Commission and the participating states who together co-fund this, let me call it, instrument. This is, I would say, another order of magnitude compared to Eureka. So even if it is in the same field for the electronic components and systems domain, it is really complementary. In KDT, like in Excel in the past, we have huge projects, sometimes with between 50 and 100 participants, and can be 5 to 11, 13, 15 countries involved. So it's really the next step, the size above, and that is probably the reason why co-funding is needed. It's not only participating states, but also funds coming from the European Commission. So this is where we stand. Those 2 instruments are very complementary for the ECS community, but we do not want to work in silos, and we are opening up more and more to other communities. And this is why ENEAS as an association has been involved in COREnect to also come closer to the telecom community. The result of this closer cooperation is that we have signed an MOU with the 6J Industry Association, which will open further cooperation beyond COREnect, which is ending at the end of this month. And the aim is really to create that bridge between the 2 communities, to facilitate exchanges and allow them to exchange views and potentially prepare projects together. And for that, we have, of course, to open up to the new other partnership, the SNS partnership for smart network and services, but also, Brit, in Eureka clusters that could also lead to closer cooperation between XCCS and Celtic Next, for instance. So all this is, I would say, a very dynamic ecosystem. We should never stay in silos, but open up the ones to the others. And I think this is really the spirit that was behind COREnect from its very beginning until now, with this MOU paving the way to future collaborations. I will stay at this now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. So now we had the point of view of the 2 agencies, and let's switch to industry. And we have Hector Donat-Ano, who is the CEO of 5Com, and Hector, we would like to hear your view on this topic.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you very much for inviting me to this workshop. I just sent to you a presentation. Maybe you can share it. Not I can do, huh? It's not a problem. I think you're mute. Sorry.
Yes, I didn't receive anything yet. So when did you send it?
Yesterday. So it's much better if I can.
Hector, this is Jacques. I mean, you have the possibility to share yourself on the screen.
Yeah, I think that's more efficient.
Yeah, thank you.
So we can see the presentation.
Okay. So Satcom is a company that just was born like 2 years ago. I have to present the company obviously because we are a small one. We are an SME, and not all the present can know us. So at the end of the day, the thing is, since the beginning, we are business oriented, and we want to get all the knowledge in communications, in 5G especially, bring all the advantages that the 5G can offer to the industry in order to create new solutions for the industry that is coming, and creating opportunities for the European industry in general. So we are based in Valencia in the campus because our origin is based on the University of Valencia in the Polytechnic. And today we have in the team for PhD. Thanks for the instruments and the initiatives and the fundings we found in the way, especially in Europe. And here I can present to you some of the industries or projects we are working with. Here is the experience we have in Horizon 2020 project. All of them are related with connectivity and 5G mainly, and how we can even apply. There is like 2 parts of the project. In the first one, obviously, it's more based on research and investigation, innovation on different verticals. And then at the end of the day, obviously, we are doing prototypes and we are testing and validating on the field on control and real scenarios, what we are doing in the first part of the project, more related with the research. Some of the projects that we are working today, there are more, but this is just a representative, let's say, sample for you. They are in use, 5G records, 5G, IANA and Ingenious, and they are touching different points in the industry where the connectivity of 5G is crucial in order to evolve and in order to progress inside the vertical, in order to do more democratization of the technology. One, it's about automotive, it's IANA in this case, and then Ingenious is more focusing on ports, is another vertical that we're working with. Records is oriented to production, online production of all the images captured by professional producers, and then the Indus is more related with robotics and applications, advanced applications that we can have in any industry. So these are, in a summary, in a nutshell, the projects we're involved today. Obviously, these kind of instruments or initiatives at the European level are bringing us opportunities to connect, as before you were mentioning, small companies like us with big ones, or multinationals. You can see here some of the partnerships we are establishing thanks to the projects, Volkswagen, BBC, Ford, and the others you can check here. But not only with the industrial partners, also we are, creating bridges between the SMEs and big companies in telecom that are pushing for private networks in this kind of initiatives, like, for instance, Orange, Telefonica, or Entity, for instance. And we belong to some of the organizations that today are providing this kind of opportunities at European landscape for us as SME, like the 6G SNS, 5G PPP, Network Europe, and 16G. Next one, please. So answering a little bit to the question of the second panel here, focusing on what we know from our perspective and experience, especially in connectivity. Well, the first thing we should say is that the cooperation within this European landscape, the full word or the most important or key word for me is the cooperation for providing advanced solutions to the industry. I mean, obviously, in this kind of initiatives, I mean, different companies with different expertise in different areas are working in order to reach the common objective. The solutions in the industry are quite complex, and the majority of them needs different experts in different areas. So this is cooperation for me is key in order to reach a solution. And this landscape, this kind of instruments are bringing the opportunity to collaborate in order to reach the complex solutions that are presented on the industry. The second one related with electronics and microelectronics, at the end of the day, we have a part of research that is quite important in order to evolve, but obviously you have to test it and validate it in real or controlled scenarios. So the manufacturing or production of 5G prototypes, in our case, because we are oriented to 5G communications, it's quite important, and we can do and take advantage of these frameworks in order to develop useful 5G prototypes for the industry at the end of the day, that is putting the requirements on the table, nothing else and nothing more. The first thing we found is that any machine on the IoT world or the industry world is not able to talk 5G. So the first thing we have to do is to provide this kind of prototypes for starting and developing 5G in the industries. Obviously, it's providing large dissemination. It's based on the use cases that we have in real environments, where we are able to show the 5G real potential to the industry. And that's something that is not easy in another way, because sometimes if the industry don't see the benefits and at the end of the day, the revenues they will have or potential benefits, it's super difficult to show them 5G solutions, for instance, based on private networks. So this is something that is also enabled in this landscape or framework. Obviously, we are speeding up the 5G industrial solutions because they are testing since the beginning, thanks to the instruments again. And it means faster time to market and obviously increase the window opportunity for Europe in general. 5G democratization, this is the other word I like to mention. Democratization is quite important for these new technologies that obviously are not familiar for the majority of the industry in our continent. And this democratization is important part also for all the agents, not only the big companies and multinationals that are present in the full continent, also for small ones. And the last but not least, it's based on these opportunities and we are participating. Obviously, we're increasing the knowledge in a company like us, SMEs, creating people that is more expert in advanced solutions, even being able to contract PhDs. So at the end of the day, the knowledge is spread in our company, in an SME, thanks to this kind of, let's say, instruments or initiative at European level. And this is pretty much what I want to share to you right now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Hector. I see time is running out because we are already 1 o'clock, but I hope we can still continue for some 10 to 15 minutes, as we also started a bit later. And so still have one presenter before we raise some questions, and that's Colin Wilcock. So thanks, Colin. Although it's a public holiday in Germany, you are present, which is very much appreciated. And so Colin is the chair of the board of 6G Industry Association and the SNS Governing Board. And please, Colin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As we're already over time, let me try and keep this really short, keep within the 5 minutes or even less. Will you share the slides or shall I start?
If you can share, because I have only a PDF file, which is more difficult to share.
Oh, is that true? Let me share, not a problem. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we do.
Okay, well, let me quickly then. So, yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for staying on after the end of the meeting. I'll try not to take too much of your time. I wanted to concentrate.
Actually, Colin, this is Jacques. Your slides are not shown on, full screen. We see the current slide and the next slide.
Okay, well, I have to go with that. I haven't got time to mess about. Okay. Let's just keep going. So yeah, I'm representing the 6GIA. So this is an industry association that tries to be the voice of European industry on all things 5G and 6G. So starting from the telecoms domain, but also going beyond the normal industry of Ericsson and Nokia and telecom. And we have the SMEs, we have the research institutes, we have the academics. So we have the whole community within our association. And one of the key things we are doing together with the European Commission is we are running this smart network and services. So I just wanted to spend 2 minutes looking at smart network and services. It's been mentioned a lot of times today, but no one's actually clarified what it's trying to achieve. So this is a large or fairly large new partnership which has started at the end of last year. It's intending to invest 900 million euros of public money and at least an equal amount from industrial money to try and bring forward mainly 6G research in Europe. And a lot of the strategies we talked about today are trying to leverage the strength of Europe, places where Europe does have a foothold, and trying to broaden that foothold. And in our view, this area of cellular communications is one of the few where Europe can claim a number of the leading companies, a number of the leading vendors. And so it's a good candidate for trying to build the expertise and the leadership there, trying to extend that through to the components and the semiconductor industries. So I'm not going to go into detail here because of time, but just trying to say there are a number of things we're trying to do within this JU. So clearly we're trying to retain that leadership which I've just talked about. And there we need to invest a lot of money in the entire end-to-end system from the physical layer all the way through to services, looking at indeed also the use cases and the actual applications of 6G. And 6G is the key thing we're trying to develop. And clearly what we wish to do is not just create that technology, but actually apply that technology as we do in that middle pillar, where we're taking that technology, bringing that to European industry, showing that it's worth investing, bringing them on board, making Europe more competitive. And lastly, then the societal needs, trying to address some of these green issues, reducing the use of energy, aging population, all of these things. So it's a large initiative trying to mobilize the strength of the European ecosystem, trying to bring a sense of leadership in 6G for Europe. And hopefully this is something then we can build on and leverage that to have some sort of leadership in the components and hardware industry. Okay, considering the time, I will leave it at that. If you're interested, all the information is on the web. My contact details are here. You can read more about it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Colin, and thank you all people who are part of the panel. I think we still have time for a few questions. So if someone of the audience has a question, please launch it via the chat. We will have a look into this. I would like to start with one question which builds a bit further on the robot analysis of CARI, I would call it. I think if we all look into the funding landscape, we see that there are multiple programs, multiple organizations, different groups, the Commission, different member states, and all define priorities and roadmaps for the telecom sector, for the microelectronics sector. I often state that COREnect meant one small step for the partners in the project, but one giant leap for the telecom microelectronics landscape in Europe, to quote some, or to change some quote from a famous person. So this was a good example of how things can fit together, but do you see some other means to ensure that priorities, roadmaps of different domains throughout the value chain, and not only the telecom value chain, but also the automotive, the industry value chain, etc., can be better connected, and how can we avoid that we have different unconnected pathways throughout the value chain? Any advice? Is projects like COREnect the only solution? Do you have any other views? Do you have any other ideas? We've seen there have been initiatives in Europe and in member states, but your view on this would be appreciated. Who would like to take a start on this? Caroline?
Yes, maybe we should first just reminding indeed that each association and group, like the 5G PPP or ENEAS for the ECS domain, we trigger with our experts some roadmap. We have in ENEAS, together with the other industry associations involved in KDT, a roadmap called the ECS Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. You have, of course, to keep pace with the rhythm of renewal, and this is updated every year. So it's really showing the challenges of the coming years up to 10 years ahead with different chapters. And in this roadmap, we cover, of course, microelectronics, both in terms of, I would say, the stack from material through the chips to the system and systems of systems. We also cover some, I would say, transversal competencies or technologies. One of them is connectivity. So we open up, of course, to, I would say, adjacent complementary domains. Plus, on top of that, we have addressed the scope of the major application domains like healthcare, like agri-foods, industry, and so on. So we have a living roadmap, which is open not only to our experts, but also to experts of other fields. And that's where I think the role of industry associations is crucial, to help gather together experts from different fields to contribute to the roadmaps of each other, make sure there is not, I would say, things which are completely forgotten, or just make sure that there is an understanding of both parties of each other. I will leave it here.
Okay, thanks. I saw Colin, you also raised your hand. You are still on mute, Colin.
Yeah, I'm just trying to unmute. The button was hidden. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think clearly cooperation is the key thing here. I mean, there is a fundamental problem that you could say, well, let's just have one overriding partnership which covers all of these areas. But the trouble is, if you make a partnership, any activity too broad, then you have no focus and you achieve nothing. So it's getting that balance right. And I feel that certain cooperation between the associations, also between the partnerships, I think is very useful. There are starting to be those links. We have now an MOU, and thank you for signing this, between the two associations being represented here, for example. I think that's a start. I tend to feel there is also some space for some sort of coordination at the European Commission level across the partnerships in ICT. So we've had one or other meeting in the past where people have presented there. I could imagine some sort of forum, some sort of summit, something like that, where the relevant, perhaps ICT partnerships could come together and discuss what their plans are and see how they're collaborating, rather more in a top-down way. So rather than letting each partnership say, well, this is what I'm planning. If you like it, come and talk to me. Otherwise, forget it. Trying to have a more strategic view, European view from the top down.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Anyone else who wants to react on the question or the comments? I see Kari.
It's not really the area of public authorities, because the roadmaps usually reflect the views of the industry associations, the industry that are doing it. So my answer would have been in the beginning that it's not our problem, but then after giving it more thought, it's actually our problem. Since if we try to travel with these roadmaps and we see different versions of the same map, and they don't coincide, then we have a problem. And we actually could spot the discrepancies in the roadmaps if we would like to do it, but that would be need energy from the public authorities. But it's like planning the route from Helsinki to Brussels. There's a lot of local maps there, and if you don't try to travel that distance, you don't know if the maps match or not. So probably public authorities could be also alert in this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Looking into the time. Oh, René, you still have a remark? You're on mute, René.
Yes. Hi. Something that Kari says, I really would just throw in 2 sentences. Yes, I think public authorities, for example, especially with standardization, could really drive innovation. Normally, talking about standardization, we all know this hampers innovation if you have too much. But if you have none, then you don't go in the right enough direction. So I think that public authorities, with the standardization that you are free to follow or not to follow, they can give a framework that can speed up innovation. Definitely.
Okay, thank you, René. So I think we can come to some conclusions. I think COREnect was a good example on how it can work. I think we also mentioned some other examples, and I think it's important to keep the dialogue open, to keep an intense dialogue open, not just, I would say, in superficial dialogue, but real intense dialogue, in intense discussions, good workshops, to keep working on joint roadmaps and to keep the dialogues open between RTOs, industry and public authorities. In order to conclude the panel, I would like to ask every panelist to just state one word, which gives in fact what type of priority or what type of improvement can be done within Europe in order to ensure that we really have a good working joint industry in, for example, the microelectronics telecom value chain. So please, everyone, I would like to ask one word only to conclude on a priority or an improvement in our landscape. So let's keep the same order as we had in the beginning. So René, you're the first.
One word, speed.
Okay, and then we have Christian.
Simplicity.
Okay, Kari.
Kari, you're muted.
That's really good because you didn't want to hear that. You got me off guard. Cooperation.
Okay, Britt.
What about synergies?
And then we have Caroline.
Alignment.
Hector.
I had alignment and cooperation, but then I have to say dialogue. Talk more, yeah.
Okay, and Colin?
Yeah, I'll come back to collaboration, because I think that's actually the key that we're talking about.
Okay, thanks. And as a moderator, I would like to add that for me, the most important word is people, because we have to keep working together with people amongst us. And on that conclusion, I would like to give the floor back to Jacques, who is moderating the workshop. And thanks everyone again for your valuable contributions.
Well, thank you, Patrick.
Thanks,
You
Patrick,
to
for
all
an
of
excellent
you
job.
for providing your views. And as you are saying, we are running a little bit late. And thank you for all the remaining participants. And we are going to skip the conclusion. I'm sorry about Janning. I know you wanted to say a few words, but again, it's already 1:15. However, one thing that I would like to ask all of you, if you can put your webcam on, all of you, including the participants, and we can take a snapshot of the audience, if you do not mind. Yeah, I see more and more photos of everyone. That's great. So let's take a couple of snapshots pictures. Blanca, is it okay?